ended. If it was Hollywood, you'd probably say, well, they're going to come up with a sequel. But it's not this case. I guess we have to do a quick intro on that. Why did we jump from verse 1 all the way up to 11? Because actually Jesus told 3 parables. They were lost and found parables, and maybe some of you know them. It was, he starts off with things that they would understand, lost and found. There was a shepherd that had 100 sheep and one got lost. And he left the 99 and went and found the other one, puts the sheep over his shoulders and heads back home. And when he gets back home, he tells his friends and other shepherds, let's celebrate because I found this sheep safe. And then the next parable was about the woman who had the 10 coins, silver coins, and had lost one. And she just went crazy. Lit the light, which is, oil is expensive. You only use it at night when you need it. But she lit the light and spent the day sweeping the house, and she found her coin. And she said to her friends, let's celebrate. I'd lost this coin, and now I found it. I would say it's like a retirement fund. And so it is, there's 2 parables of the lost and found, something they would understand. And now Jesus is making the longer, more thorough parable, and he does not mince words. When Jesus puts a story together, there's something for everyone. And he's saying, well, you understand the lost and the found and the joy, and you want to celebrate. Let me tell you about God. So he starts the story out. You've probably heard this 100 times or more, and it's often called the parable of the lost son. But I want you to remember one thing. The story starts out, a man had 2 sons. I call this title for this message, Our Prodigal Hearts. Now, in this, the son has run away. It's a story that happens every day. Usually it's the younger son who sees the world and gets a little impatient and wants out. And then, of course, towards the end, we hear about the older son and maybe not behaving quite as lovingly to his father as people would expect. And so maybe of all the variations you've heard of this message, people start pegging themselves, well, I'm probably like the older son and this guy and that person over there. They start pegging people and trying to fit out where everybody is. It's not about that. It's about God's rejoicing. Don't waste your time in figuring out, who's doing what and why did this son leave. There's 1,000 rabbit holes for this. As a matter of fact, maybe you've heard of Henri or Henry Nouwen, a Dutch-American contemplative, mystic, Roman Catholic priest. And he spent the last 10 years working with a group of people that were mentally handicapped after being a college professor. And I find this interesting. A neat old pastor gave me this one. And this is an anniversary for me, almost to the day. It was getting a little scary. I was doing my research for this. This passage has always been a favorite. And I found, before I even went to licensing school and stuff, I found when I was questioning whether I should do this or do that, this was my first sermon. I found it, the paper. It was March 12, 2010, 12 years ago. Oh, it was neatly typed up. I don't know if I never did run it through my new word processor to see if the language could be cleaned up. But I said, oh, there's a lot of detail, a lot of neat stuff in there, but somewhere along the line, Father's heart was missing. And that's what this is all about. Really, it's about the Father's heart. Jesus, first and foremost, we're continuing our talks and our understanding about grace. This is Lent, after all. And we're talking about grace given for forgiveness. repentance is all that's needed. The scary part, if there's any one scary part of this story, it's the fact that the father stayed home and let the son go. I don't know why he was old, stayed there. And you can start, even early on, you can start to see the older brother's colors. He didn't worry about dad's going out and looking each day to see where the son is. He went and worked in the field. He said, well, good riddance, bad rubbish, he's gone. Everything I see here is going to be mine someday. And he never went up looking for his brother. And that's the purpose of grace, I think. The Father knows something that maybe we don't always know. The Father in the story and our parenting God knows. Probably the hardest part of this whole thing is coming to oneself. It's a long, long journey sometimes. Getting right. I was sitting in the barber shop not too long ago, and I've been with this barber for many years. He's a recovering alcoholic, and we've celebrated like 25 years. He knew me when my kids were small and cut my kids' hair, and he was there when I kind of passed through this period of being an aircraft mechanic into answering this call. And so we share a lot. And then this one day, in the door comes another patron. I was the only one in the shop until then. And this guy, and he was so excited to see this guy. He was a fairly young guy. And this young guy had a history. He was alcohol and drugs, in and out of dry dock, in and out of rehab. And he's telling his story, and I'm sitting there and saying, I'm listening as much as the barber is. I'm hoping his clippers are staying on course. And he's telling about all this and time again. And my barber, who's been 25 years sober, says, what was it? It's a human interest story. What was it that made you change your mind? What made you finally come to your senses, come to yourself? The guy quiets it down a little bit and he says, well, I've been in and out and I was cocky and stuff, but he says, this must have been like the 8th to 9th time I was in one of these rehabs. And I wasn't particularly care for it any more than the other one, wasn't expecting too much, but then I saw these snot-nosed kids in there and they were just cocky, nasty. I mean, they were just putting in their time. They had no intention of rehabbing. They were just going to go out and have a good time as soon as they left. And he said, for once in my life, I saw them, instead of being friends or somebody that I could identify with, he says, I kind of loathed it. He said, oh my God, was I like that? He saw a picture of himself when he was younger, and he said, finally, he says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see that. And that started his long passage back home. As far as I know, he's not a Christian. I'm hoping my barber will work on him a little bit because he sees him more than I do. But that's the story. We got the wrong. No, what are we doing? Wow, the colors are off by a bit. This is The Return of the Prodigal by Rembrandt, sometime in the 1600s. That seems to be off quite a bit, but oh, it's my angle. Rembrandt also had painted this when he was pretty old in life. He had been a parent for a while. And a lot of people say, well, what are all these other people around there? We could pretty much assume maybe this is light, but the platform is lit, the sun is lit, the father, the one tall person on the far side, they speculate because he's a little lit more than the rest of them. I might have liked the photo too much, but he's looking down, holding his peace. But this Henry Nouwen fellow, he taught for years at Harvard Theological. He also was a guest speaker and professor at Notre Dame. He went all around the country and in other parts of the world as guest speakers. And he talks about his journey. And then he was just about burnt out, and he went to a place called La Arche, and it was over in France, and it was with a home for handicapped folks because they weren't always the most welcome. And there he spent some time, and on the back of the door of one of their leaders was a poster of that, and he just was transfixed by it. He had pictured himself at times being on a journey home himself, more of the prodigal, even though he didn't do anything like the prodigal son does in the stories. He realized that the hand of grasping the son and holding him up against the father's heart, and that transfixed. As a matter of fact, later on, that the original Rembrandt is over in St. Petersburg in some I won't call it a friary, but some sort of hermitage. And that's where the original one, and somehow he had a chance to go and see it. And he sat in front of that painting for a couple of hours each day for several days, meditating and taking notes. It was part of his healing process from his burnout. On the platform is the sun that we know and coming back. Some helpers. In the somewhat shadows with the dark hat is somebody that they think Rembrandt might have thought of as one of the guests that were invited and was just kind of watching along. In the brighter light is the tall guy sitting there, and even though the sun isn't present at the beginning, Rembrandt wanted to put the whole heart of God into his painting, the heart of a father. And so he's just looking down, hands folded, dismissive. And so we got to figure out, if you want to peg anything, whether you're one son or the other son, maybe we're not even in the picture. Maybe we're in the shadows, the people that are just watching. The older son was so close and yet so far. Maybe the older son is probably a little closer to where we find ourselves. And in his book, and I can't take a lot of time for it. As a matter of fact, John and myself were going over that, and he said, "You're going to really do the prodigal son?" I said, "That's what the lectionary has. It works with Lent. It's forgiveness. It's repentance." He said, "But it's so thick." He said, "The other pastor that he's working with, they're going to do a study. I think we might come back to this, whether it be a book study or a sermon series. But we're going to unpack it a little bit, because I think this passage, this story, this parable, has probably got everything that all the gospel has in it together, because there were the sinners and the tax collectors and all the riffraff, as the Pharisees would call them. And the Pharisees were sitting. These are all the people that are listening. Some people say, "Oh, well, this story is for the Pharisees." Well, I'm sure the folks that are feeling like they're the cast out of the society to be considered in the Father's arms was something special. Yeah, the older son was so close and so far. This is a parable about unfathomable grace of God, our parenting God, for repentance and forgiveness. The father didn't go home, he didn't drag him back home. Maybe that's why this alcoholic would say, "Well, you got to straighten out." He wasn't ready to straighten out. It's hard to give, when we talk about go out there and be the Christ for folks, to make disciples. It's hard because some people aren't ready to hear, but you don't know who's going to hear, who's not going to hear. And that's our challenge. Henri Nouwen kind of pictured himself in several stages of being a prodigal, of being the brother. And then I'm going to read something from him because I think it struck me the most. He's talking about the photo or the painting and where did it leave him with what truth. It said, in this place where I so much wanted to be, in his Father's arms, God's arms, but I'm so fearful of being, is a place where I will receive all that I desire, all that I ever hoped for, and all that I ever need. But it is also a place where I have to let go of all I most wanted to hold on to. It is this place that confronts me with the fact that truly accepting love, forgiveness, healing is often much harder than giving it. See, he was a professor. He was a pastor and a minister for things. But deep in his heart, he felt he needed it. It's a place beyond earning, deserving, and rewarding. It's a place of surrender and complete trust. And then later he says, I did not realize how deeply rooted my resistance was and how agonizing it would be to come to my senses. Each little step towards the center seemed like an impossible demand. So that's kind of where we're at times, regardless of where you think you are with the sonships. Which son do you think you best mirror? The story ends, and the elder son hasn't seen the heart of his father. The other book that started me a long time ago in 2012 was called The Prodigal God. Prodigal meaning extensive, lavish. Most people think overdone, and the other terminology means coming back after being lost, probably from this passage. But I love the term prodigal God because he doesn't care how wasteful it is. He wants to spend all he has and then some, feeding his son and pulling him back. And just like our joys and our concerns, and then our passing the peace, the one thing that has the most value, if you are truly got the love of Christ in you, you've got to share it. That's what it's all about. And the son is just sitting there. I can't share this. I can't rejoice in my father's rejoicing because he's being too lavish with his forgiveness. He's being too lavish with his hugs. He's being too lavish with giving away the resources. Maybe he's even worrying about, oh, well, I guess I'm going to be cutting back into my inheritance again. Whichever way it goes, he's not seeing the heart of the Father. And I think that's why Jesus leaves the message. I think for those undesirables that were listening to that, they got the message that they were welcome. That God wants to have him back. And I think the undone message left open was for the Pharisees. You got to make a choice. You preach a good story, but does your heart reflect? Is your heart still prodigal? And that's where he leaves it. Yes, just like Henri says, the journey home to the arms of God is a long journey. We know we need it. We know it's complete. But it's the matter of letting our human side go a little bit at a time, a little bit more at a time. But you know what? The hug of a parenting God. It squeezes your soul. Just like a little kid that's lost or anything else. That prodigal son had nothing. But one thing he did have is what was in his memory, in his heart, of what home was like. maybe when he was younger before he got all indignant. And he said, well, I remember those days. Even the servants were taken care of. He couldn't hope for what he got. He just wanted to be fed. I don't think we understand the amount of grace that's available, the unfathomable amount of grace that's available for us. In that journey home, we get bits and pieces of it. There's only so much, I hate to say it, but there's only so much grace you can take at one time. The part that we don't understand is God's love. It's not a matter of understanding God. We'll never really understand him. But you don't have to understand a loving type of mercy. And that's the longing of the heart. And that's about incredibly good. That's enough. Our next hymn